I'm Sam Pilafian, tuba player with the Boston Brass. I have had a second career in my life as a recording producer, especially with the two gentlemen that I'm with today. This is Eric Rombach Kenda, conductor of the University of New Mexico Wind Symphony, and we're here making a recording, a concerto grosso recording, very interesting project. And also Clark Rigsby, who I've worked for in my life for over 20 years as a producer for his company, Tempest Sound. He's one of the great recording engineers, especially in terms of how many different types of music he's able to capture. So now that I've been nice to them, let's get down to business about why you should be recording your ensembles and the benefits of such things. And I owe that to Clark Rigsby because we were going to record an amateur band one time, and I'd never done that before. And to me, that's too much pathology. I didn't think that it could be sorted out. And he sat me down and explained that the real beauty of this type of thing is to work educationally. Everybody learns from it, and there's a great deal of takeaway from a session like that. And it included me. When we finished that session, I had become better for it. So thank you, Clark, and now let's get down to business. The reason for doing this is that the musical level lift is a total keeper. And I'd like to share that, and we're going to be doing perspectives today from the conductor-teacher side of things and from the production side of things, engineer Clark and producer me. So let's stay on the subject of why. Why record your ensemble?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but I think it's always good for students to have some sort of big project that they look forward to, something that's a little bit different experience than what they normally get just through the course of performances throughout the year. In a recording situation, and specifically one in which we're engaging guest artists, professional guest artists, is something that students look forward to, they strive for, they actually achieve some of their very, very best work in the process of this, but they also sort of learn from watching the guest soloists and some of the challenges that they face, which are some of the similar challenges that students face, which is how do you do your best work, time after time after time. In our sessions, we run a 3-hour session with a break of about 10 minutes in between. That's a pretty long period of time to be concentrating and still performing at your best level every step of the way. So they learn things about endurance, about pacing, and certainly they learn a lot about preparation, because the preparation that they do in the rehearsals and in the practice room reveals itself when you get to the recording session. So students learn a lot about themselves, and they learn a lot about their fellow musicians in this recording process. It's very different than a live performance, which has all of that emotional energy that builds up and excitement. As a conductor, I try to get the ensemble to still perform at that emotional excitement that they would in a live performance, but you're going to do multiple takes, and it allows the producers from backstage, they're the ones with the headphones on, to really be marking the score and catching things that might otherwise go by as acceptable in a live performance. But when you're putting it on a record that's going to be forever, everybody is after the same thing, which is they want perfection on everything. From a conductor's viewpoint, it's a great way to think about efficiency in rehearsals. And what I've learned, we started our first recording project about 16 years ago, and the soloists were Phil Smith and Joe Alessi from the New York Philharmonic. And boy, that pushed my musical level, but it also taught me some important lessons about trying to be as efficient and try to be as emotionally level throughout the entire process, because a recording can be a lot of fun or it can be a real stressful situation depending upon how the conductor approaches it. So rather than getting tense and all of that, just get focused, and you're there as a facilitator to the soloist and to the ensemble. That's probably enough to be said in one chunk. So I'm going to hand this back to Sam, and why don't you ask us some different questions.
Thank you, Eric. Actually, I'm going to stay on the idea of why with you, Clark, because every student and every teacher out there has a recording. They can use their iPhone, they can use a small camera or a Zoom or something like that. We're sitting here in a field of probably 20 microphones and a deck of tree and super high quality equipment. Why? Why should this happen for ensembles around the country?
Well, first of all, I do this because it's my job. That's how I make a living.
So that's why they should do it, so that Clark makes more money.
That's exactly right. But more than that, I feel like any recording is more than just capturing what you do as a live performance. I feel like the final recorded project is a work of art unto itself. Mm-hmm. And it's also a snapshot in time for these kids oftentimes. And when we do this sort of recording, the analogy is, we eat at Mastro's Steakhouse, but we also eat at McDonald's. This is more of a Mastro's Steakhouse type of situation. And when you get this intensity with these kids, they grow, and you see students grow from doing these recordings. And Sam and I have seen that, particularly with the University of New Mexico. We feel like Eric really captured the idea of this, and that's why we've come back here so many times. So, but again, it is a snapshot in time, and it's something you'll remember for the rest of your life. And the educational benefits, I think, are obvious when they go to play after the recording.
Can I say something about that too?
Yes.
I think one of the great lessons that I learned from recording is how to deal with acoustic issues. Because if the microphones don't hear it, it essentially never happened. And so issues of resonance, issues of speaking the same language, of articulation, clarity, balance, all those things that we work on, it enables you to work at these things at a much higher degree than you would in a live performance, perhaps. Especially when you're doing multiple takes. You might get a really good take on something, and yet you still can't quite hear the euphoniums. And I think I learned a valuable lesson from our first recording was we got into the studio and went, wow, I'd really like to hear more euphoniums here. And so Clark demonstrated for me that if he pulled the level of the euphoniums up, it pulled the level of everybody up, and suddenly the sound was distorted. So I had to learn for other solutions for some of these acoustic issues, like perhaps seating them in a different place, perhaps just changing their dynamics. And sometimes it's a matter of changing the articulation. They're loud enough, but they don't get the clarity they need. So you adapt to the musical environment in which you're going to be performing so that you can solve these acoustic issues.
You got it.
Excellent. Absolutely. Insert where you want.
351, 356 to make sure that shake is there.
Okay, start at 349, and we're going to get to say 359, so we can drop the shake. 349 to 359.
This is an insert, 349 to 359. Take 58. Insert, take 59.
I think as you hear them talk, and we're sitting up here as a team, that there's another part to this, which is it is collaborative, and in your school system you have colleagues that you should invite to be the producer. The producer's job is to listen through the microphones. It could be an engineer producer, it could be two different people, but the idea is if it doesn't come through the microphones, it's not going to go on the product. So we have to interpret, and this idea of teaming up is very attractive to the students. They feel like they're being taught by a group of people. There's a committee here that really cares, that's chasing the idea that this will be around 30 years from now. I'm going to show my grandchildren what I sounded like when I was a high school student. And that's a huge permanent record, as Clark alluded to before. I think it's very important for us to remember the how part of this, which is that get a team together. And it could be a community effort, it could be a school system effort, but get a team together and do favors for each other. That's how young filmmakers and recordists work. They work with each other. And as soon as the students see a team trying to make the production happen, they become more of a team. They're part of the effort, which is a group effort, and they don't feel alone. Microphones and television cameras or video cameras make students extremely nervous, and that can be a very good thing. If you're going to contest and 2 months ahead of time you have a recording session, they've been conditioned response, like an astronaut is. They sit on the rocket, they don't blow it off, but they go through the entire countdown sequence, so they know what it's like. So to experience that kind of intensity is the reason, this has to happen. So here's the other part of it, is that if you do a concert, you rehearse to play something very well linearly, from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner, and it's over. But we are going to do it in pieces, and we're going to repeat it and have it hopefully have a learning curve and get better every time. That sounds like practicing to me. So we practice as a group, but actually pretty soon it's a group effort, and you get used to pursuing perfection. So how does that not change the level of the rest of the school year or the next school year? Don't ever forget that veterans teach the newbies, the newer students, and when they've gone through this, they let everybody know how intense it's going to get, so you better buckle down now in September 1, because May 1 the machines are going to go on. And that becomes something bigger than state contest. Well, if they don't load up all their fears on state contest, they'll probably do better. So there's a huge reason to team up and to make this recording. If you don't rehearse in a mock audition, it doesn't work. So, mock recording session, excuse me. So we do take 1, take 2, and we listen together. I think the biggest reason, the how part of this is to listen to playbacks. And so the playbacks become extremely important in that in the highest quality you can afford to reproduce sound, the students will, for the first time, really hear what's coming out of their horn. Every student that you've ever taught is obsessed with sound. They want to know how the pros sound like that. That's why they take it up. They have a great time with it, and they've got a dream. A dream is that it would sound good and later beautiful, and then the best later on for some of your students. But if they don't chase that, they lose their way if they don't hear playback. That's extremely important. So the idea of giving the students something to listen to is, I just want to ask you about that. Would you bring speakers to sessions or come back and have game films the next day, that sort of thing? Have the student experience of after the fact.
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, we're in a situation where most of these students won't hear the final product until it's finalized, until we go to mastering and we finish the product. They either get a CD in their hand or they get files of some sort. So a few students will come back to us. We're working on headphones in this situation, so a few students will come back, and I'm always happy to put the headphones on them so they hear what they're really doing. I think that's an inspiring thing. If I could go back just a second, though, and take this to street level just shortly. There's a social component to this whole thing that shouldn't be discounted, and that is that I believe, and I know these guys believe, that music is a team sport, and the hang is important. You want to make music at the highest level, but you want to have fun doing it, and you want to do it with people that you like. And this is why our relationship goes on and on. all the guys in Boston Brass are great fun, and when you're making great music and hanging with people that you like, that's a lasting thing. That lasts for the rest of your life. I think you would agree with that.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, and you as teacher, you're going to comment on this, but you as the teacher in the room, we'd like to know your takeaway after these events.
Yeah, I think this whole notion of creating an environment where students are challenged, but they work together, they experience together, and all of us that have, conducted ensembles over the years, we understand the importance of, like, for example, travel, how that gets kids to bond, or how playing for a state convention can get kids to bond in that special experience. Well, it can happen in the recording environment as well. And if you're going to involve any guest artists, give ample time for the students to be able to interact with those people. But more than that, check these people out. Make sure these are the kinds of role models that you want your students to interact with. Because great artists aren't just great players, they're great people that are willing to share their art with the students there. So what we find is that initially, for the students who have never done this before, there's this great unknown, and they keep hearing about this recording coming up. And if we've done it frequently enough that students from the previous year have been involved, it shortens the learning time, because there's institutional knowledge that one generation of students passes on to the next generation. They'll say things like, well, this is going to be the greatest thing that you've ever done, and here's what's going to happen and whatnot. Sometimes we put several years in between projects and where there's no institutional knowledge with the students. And so part of what you have to do is do some build-up training type things for them, so that you can show them what short runs and short takes, how those are different than trying to get, as Sam said, that linear approach to a live performance. One of the things that we always do, we've done this for every one of our albums, is we've preceded the recording days with a live performance, so that there's that emotional build-up, and then they have that experience that now it's our job to not only get perfection, but also to get that feeling of the emotional buildup from the live performance there. But I actually notice a physical change in the body language of students after the first session. They come back for the second session, and there's this buoyancy, like, wow, that was really something. We got something amazing accomplished. It was hard work, but it was worth it in the end. Yeah. So I always notice that body language change from the first session to the second session, which is probably a good thing, because they get tired by the end of the second session. We all get a little bit tired there. I want to talk about a couple of the roles too, because as the conductor in a recording, it's not your job to be catching all of the mistakes that might be taking place. That's the producers, and I usually have a team of producers. So my colleague Chad Simons is the head producer. Since we're using Boston Brass as our soloist, our trumpet professor John Marchando has the ear specifically on the Boston Brass, and our percussion professor Scott Ney has his ear specifically on the percussion section. And it's my job on the stage to keep the energy and the flow going. So I'll call out the sections that we're going to take. I'm the one person who can see the musicians and the soloists on the stage, and I can detect fatigue or frustration or elation or whatever it is. And it's almost like coaching a football game. You have to be able to react to as the environment changes. And so it's my job to do that. It's their job to keep me on track in terms of, what do we still need to get covered here, and that sort of thing. It's also my job to be very, very consistent about tempo and very, very consistent about pitch. So we may periodically retune during the session so that the pitch doesn't rise, and all of a sudden we've got a record you can't put together because the takes don't line up. So tempo maintenance, and that's something that's been very helpful to me as a conductor, is being very aware of the real subtle changes of tempo, being aware of the real subtle changes of dynamics, balance, and blend, because it's hard to put two takes together in an editing situation if they don't match up or the shape of the phrase doesn't match up. So I think what you'll find is that not only will your students really learn a lot from this process, but you as teachers and as conductors have the potential to learn a lot of things as well. And I really don't know any other way of learning some of these things than this. What we did this year is we expanded this out. I invited several of the New Mexico high school band directors that wanted to attend to sit backstage and watch things from the recording booth perspective. And both of we had two that took advantage of this. this time, and both just said, wow, I had no idea, and I learned so much from doing that. So if you can attend a recording session somewhere, and in fact, that's actually how I got hooked. Sam invited me to a recording session, it's probably like 25 years ago.
That's right.
In Rye, New York. They're making a Sousa album. With
For
some of the-
EMI
For
records,
EMI, with some of the New York freelancers and that sort of thing. And I just sat and watched the whole process from the recording studio perspective and learned a great deal about that.
Might be good to get the percussion tribe going on that, on the clave starting at 393, just to get on a roll, and then we'll jump on their train.
393,
We'll go,
and we want to get into 417, which is where we started.
yeah. Okay, good to go?
393.
Bar 393 to 417, take 63.
So in the words of the great Mark Gould, we've kicked a touchdown. Now all we got to do is the extra point. So we're playing a short game now. We got a break after this. Got it? So use up your vital organs. Now we have 3 hours to get them back. No, let's finish.
Guys, rolling out of 405. The bass drum needs to keep his organs in.
Okay.
Is that where we started today?
Well, we started at
Yeah.
410, right?
Right, and we're still looking for 403 and 404 just with time between quintet and brass. Other than that, we're in pretty good shape.
Can I hear my brass, please, at the 5/4 bar? What?
That was shorter, it'd be more time. Yeah, bring it.
And
Big band short.
back here, we need shortness.
Yeah.
Tower power.
Big band catch.
And what?
Especially the lowest trumpets. Lowest trumpets much shorter.
The fa, 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 that note, it's always ahead. You guys are playing. Fa, 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 fa. Instead of fa, 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 fa.
Don't listen to the horns.
If you want, if you're gonna practice, you may wanna take it down an octave, so you said your charge, but you get the rhythm right.
Tsuya.
And the horns, I know it's got, how is it notated like that riff? Highest note possible, but starting where?
C.
Okay, yeah, so it's like, make sure that the top is strong, so don't try to like start too low or whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's like, cause it's covered down here, it's got the wall, so it's like, so you've got more shit on the top of it.
Do that again, brass. And what?
It sounds way stronger with that.
Let's do 393.
3. Bar 393 to 417, take 64.
You will only go as far as your ear develops as a teacher, and the greatest ear thing would be to have an engineer like Clark sitting there setting up, getting some a great musical experience, and then you will do the post-record with somebody like Clark and learn to listen repeatedly for perfection and seek it out and find the best takes, the best performance. Your heightened awareness orally stays for quite a while. There's a glow that's It's a direct glow that lasts for about 6 weeks, but you never really come back from these experiences. So you don't know that Clark and I just had breakfast before we turned these machines on. We were talking about your learning curve. So how was he 16 years ago?
Well, I think Eric was relatively nervous at that point. And but which was great. I thought that was endearing, you know, because a lot of people respond to us as producers in an arrogant way, and that doesn't help the process along. So, you know, but he really had these kids ready to go, and you know, when we get here, these kids are working their way towards it all year. And when we get here, they're like pros, and Eric has now completely understands the process and has made it his own, and it's fun to come here, and that's why everything ends up being at a very high level here.
That's right. Good. There's a saying, I think Miles Davis is the first person that said it, but familiarity breeds speed, and so we record quicker than we used to. Just in terms of an hour of recording, there's not decision making. We already know if it puts together in the post-record. You as a teacher need to have this experience. There's a decision making that you're doing all the time. Whenever a group is playing, you're making a priority list of what you're going to work on. And when it's for keeps, in a recording session, it clarifies your process of thought. So we invite you to get involved, and you'll make friends for many years that will become musical colleagues. And you can imagine if this lattice work was throughout a school system, how much more bonded together we are instead of competitive. Let us never forget that a lot of what we talked about today sounds like athletics. It's the big game, it's the championship. But in music, when you do it right, nobody loses, and everybody walks away with a permanent record. Hope you get involved. And thank you very much for your attention.